Colonel Warren Stiles pressed the barrel of his pistol against the temple of the young intelligence officer and did not blink. "You told me she was dead," he said, his voice almost gentle, almost kind, the way a man sounds when he has already decided what he is going to do. "I paid for a body. I paid for a burial. I paid for her name to disappear from every file, every record, every living memory." He pulled back the hammer. "So explain to me how a dead woman just saved Ryan Hale's life in a trauma bay 3 hours ago." The officer said nothing. Stiles pulled the trigger. "If this story grips you the way I think it will, please subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The night Olivia Chen saved Lieutenant Ryan Hale's life started the same way every bad night at Mercy General started. With the double doors blasting open, the cold air pouring in from outside, and someone screaming for a trauma team. It was 11:47 on a Tuesday, which meant the ER was already running on fumes. 2 nurses had called in sick. The attending physician on duty, Dr. Marcus Webb, was on his 4th cup of coffee, and his 2nd hour passed when he should have gone home. The fluorescent lights in the trauma bay were the kind of white that made everything look worse than it was, or sometimes exactly as bad as it was. The stretcher came through fast, pushed by 2 paramedics who looked like they had seen something tonight that they were going to be thinking about for a long time. The man on the stretcher was big, even strapped down, even pale, even barely breathing. He looked like someone who was built to survive things that would kill other men. His shirt had been cut away. The gauze packed over his left side was already soaked through, deep red going dark. One of the paramedics was talking fast, reading off vitals, but half the team was already looking at the wound and doing math in their heads, and the math was not good. "BP is dropping," said Carrie, one of the floor nurses, not panicking, just stating the fact. Dr. Webb snapped on gloves. "What happened?" "Gunshot wound to the left flank," the paramedic said. "Through and through on the surface, but we think there's fragmentation. He was conscious when we picked him up, became agitated in transit." "Agitated how?" "He kept saying he needed the best surgeon in the building, kept saying it like a command, not a request, like he was used to being obeyed." Webb nodded. "Someone page Dr. Huang. Tell him we need him now, not in 5 minutes." That was when the man on the stretcher opened his eyes. They were gray eyes, the kind of gray that was not soft or uncertain, the kind of gray that had seen the inside of dark places and come back. He turned his head slowly, deliberately, scanning the trauma bay the way a man scans a room when he walks into it and needs to know every exit, every threat, every face. His eyes moved across Dr. Webb, across the paramedics, across Carrie, across the equipment, and then they stopped. Olivia was standing near the supply cart, already pulling what she needed, her movements quiet and efficient, the way they always were. She was not the kind of nurse who made noise when she worked. She was not the kind of woman who took up a lot of space. She had dark hair pulled back, no makeup, scrubs that had seen better days, and the kind of calm expression that other nurses sometimes found unsettling because it never changed no matter what walked through those doors. She had been working at Mercy General for 14 months. People liked her. No one knew much about her. The man on the stretcher looked at her, and something happened to his face. It was not recognition in the ordinary sense. It was not the look a man gives a woman he knows from somewhere and is trying to place. It was something far more complicated and far more frightened than that. His jaw tightened. His eyes went wide for just a fraction of a second before he locked them down, and then his hand, which had been lying flat on the stretcher, curled into a fist so tight his knuckles went white. "Get her out," he said. The room did not quite stop, but it slowed down. Dr. Webb looked up. "Excuse me?" The nurse. His voice was low and controlled, the way a voice gets when the person speaking it is working very hard to keep it that way. "Get her out of this room. Now." Carrie looked at Olivia. Olivia did not move. She was still holding the IV line she had been preparing. Her expression had not changed. "Sir," Webb said, using the firm, professional tone he used with patients who were in pain, and saying things that pain makes people say, "You have a serious wound, and we need to stabilize you. No one is leaving this room." "I'm not asking." "Neither am I." The monitor beside the stretcher beeped sharply, BP dropping again. Webb turned back to the wound. "Carrie, push another line. Someone tell me where Huang is." 12 minutes out," someone called from the desk. 12 minutes, Webb muttered. "Fantastic." The man on the stretcher turned his head toward Olivia again. He was watching her the way you watch something you are not entirely sure is real. And there was fear in it. Not the fear of a man who was dying, though he was dying. This was older than that. This was the kind of fear that had been living in someone's chest for a long time, pressed down and managed and not looked at directly. And now, here it was, standing 3 feet away in a pair of scrubs, holding an IV line. "What's your name?" he said. Olivia looked at him. "Olivia," she said. "Chen." Something moved through him at that. You could see it. He breathed out through his nose and said, almost to himself, "No, that's not your name." The whole room heard it. Carrie's hands slowed. One of the paramedics glanced at the other. Webb kept his eyes on the wound, but his attention had shifted, even if his hands had not. Olivia's expression did not change. She finished setting up the IV and moved to the stretcher. "I'm going to start this line," she said, professional and neutral. "You need fluids." He grabbed her wrist, not violently, not threateningly. His grip was tight and deliberate. The grip of a man who needed someone to stop moving for just 1 second so he could understand what he was looking at. His gray eyes were on her face, and they were searching. And what they were searching for was something he was not ready to find. "Look at me," he said quietly. "Just look at me and tell me I'm wrong." Olivia looked at him. Something passed between them that no one else in the room could read. And then she said, just as quietly, "You're bleeding internally. If we don't get ahead of this in the next few minutes, it won't matter who I am." He let go of her wrist. She started the line. Dr. Webb straightened up and made eye contact with Carrie across the stretcher. A look that said, quietly, "We will be talking about this later." Carrie gave a tiny nod that said she was aware. The monitor spiked. "His pressure is tanking," Carrie said. And suddenly it was all hands moving, all voices clipped and fast, and the personal strangeness of 30 seconds ago was overridden by the immediate and ruthless physics of a man whose body was losing the argument with his injuries. Webb was calling out orders. Someone was on the phone with the OR. The paramedics stepped back to give the team room and exchanged another look by the door. One of them shook his head slightly, like he was deciding not to say whatever he had been about to say. It was Olivia who stopped everything again. Not with drama, not with a raised voice. She stopped it the way she did everything, quietly and with absolute certainty. She was looking at the imaging the paramedics had brought, looking at the numbers on the monitor, looking at something on the man's left side that no one else had focused on yet, and she said, "The fragmentation isn't external. There's a secondary wound, posterior, left side, near the 12th rib. He's bleeding from 2 places, not 1. Webb looked at her. "The external wound looks worse," she continued, and her voice was exactly the same as it had been 30 seconds ago when she was talking about starting an IV. Calm, factual, unavoidable. But the primary bleed is internal, and it's not slowing down. If Dr. Huang goes in looking for the obvious, he's going to miss the one that kills him. Silence. Not long, maybe 2 seconds, but the kind of silence that has weight. "Olivia," Webb said slowly, "how do you know that?" "Because I'm looking at his pressure curve," she said, "and the rate of decline is not consistent with the surface wound. It's too fast. And because there's bruising developing on his flank that wasn't there when he came in, you can feel the rigidity if you palpate here." She indicated the area. I'd bet my license on it. One of the younger residents, a kid named Desmond, who had been quiet in the corner, looked at Olivia with an expression that was somewhere between impressed and unnerved. He had been a nurse for 3 years. He was good at his job. He would not have said what she just said, and not because he was afraid to, but because he would not have known to look. Webb stared at her for one more second, then turned to the patient. He palpated carefully, methodically. He pressed 2 fingers to the area Olivia had indicated. His face changed. "Get me that portable ultrasound," he said. "Now." The image confirmed it inside of 90 seconds. Secondary internal bleed, exactly where Olivia had said. Exactly the size she had implied. Exactly the kind of injury that got missed in the chaos of a more visible wound and then quietly ended a man's life on the table. Someone in the room exhaled. It was the kind of exhale that came with the word "close" attached to it, even if no one said the word out loud. The man on the stretcher had his eyes open again. He was listening, and now he was looking at Olivia with a different kind of attention. The fear was still there, but underneath it, something else had come up. Something that looked like it might, in another person at another time, have been relief. 7 echo, he said. Nobody moved. The words hung in the air of the trauma bay like smoke after a shot. 7 echo. 2 words that meant absolutely nothing to the people in this room. GGK words that were clearly not meant for the people in this room. They were meant for one person, and that person was standing with an ultrasound probe in her hand, and she had gone very still. "Sir," said Webb, who had the distinct feeling he was no longer entirely in control of this situation. "I need you to focus on breathing." The patient ignored him. His gray eyes were locked on Olivia. "You know what it means," he said, "don't you?" Olivia set the probe down carefully. She looked at the monitor. She looked at the wound. She did not look at him. "I know you need surgery," she said. "I know it needs to happen in the next 20 minutes, or the conversation we're having right now will be the last one you ever have. I know that's what matters." "That's not an answer." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." Webb stepped between them. Not dramatically, just physically placed himself in the line of that conversation and said, "Olivia, I need you on fluids, and I need someone to check on Dr. Huang's ETA. Let's move." She moved. The room moved with her. But the words 7 echo did not leave. They stayed in the air, and Carrie heard them, and Desmond heard them, and the paramedic by the door who was filling out his report heard them. And everyone who heard them would spend the next hour trying to figure out what they meant and coming up empty. 11 minutes later, Dr. Huang arrived. He was 52, silver-haired, and had the energy of a man who had been paged out of bed but was not going to let you know that. He reviewed the chart, reviewed the imaging, reviewed Webb's notes, and then looked at the notation about the secondary wound. "Who caught this?" he said. Webb looked at Olivia across the room. Huang followed his gaze. He looked at Olivia for a moment, then he looked at the chart again. Nursing staff flagged a secondary posterior bleed on visual and manual exam, he said slowly, as if he was reading something that did not quite make sense. "Without imaging." "That's correct," Webb said. "That's not a typical nursing catch." "No," Webb said, "it isn't." Huang looked at Olivia one more time. His expression was unreadable. Then he said, "Good catch," and moved toward the patient with the focused efficiency of a man who had a surgery to do. The patient grabbed Huang's arm. "She comes with me," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper now. He was losing blood and energy, and he was spending what he had left on this. "Into the OR. Her." Huang removed the man's hand from his arm with professional gentleness. "That's not how this works, son." "Lieutenant," the patient said, "Lieutenant Ryan Hale, and I am not asking as a courtesy." Huang looked at him. "Lieutenant Hale, you have a serious injury, and I am going to fix it. That is how this works. Now I need you to let me do my job." "She knows things about this wound," Hale said. "Things you don't know yet. Things that aren't in any chart. His eyes found Olivia again over Huang's shoulder. Don't let them keep you out, he said to her, and his voice had dropped to something that was almost a plea. You know what I need. You know what you're looking at. The room was very quiet. Olivia stood at the edge of it, and for just one moment, the careful blankness of her expression cracked. Not much. Not in a way that most people would have noticed, but it cracked, and underneath it was something that was not calm at all. Something old and unfinished and complicated. Something that looked like it had been waiting a long time to surface. She looked at Ryan Hale, bleeding on a stretcher, and something passed between them that the rest of the room was not equipped to understand. An entire history compressed into 4 seconds. An argument they had already had somewhere else, in another life, under different names. And then she said to Dr. Huang very quietly, he's right that there are factors in this injury that are not standard. I'd like to be present. Huang stared at her. It's not protocol, Webb said carefully. No, Olivia agreed, it isn't. Huang looked at his patient, at the monitor, at the chart, at the clock on the wall. He was a practical man. He was a surgeon, which meant he was a man who dealt in outcomes. And outcomes depended on information, and good information had just come from an unexpected source. He thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. Then he said, scrub in. Nobody said anything. Huang looked at the room. Are we doing this, or are we standing here? Because I have a man bleeding on my table and exactly 0 interest in delays. Someone get me a consent form and let's move. They moved. And as they moved, as the organized, controlled chaos of a trauma going to surgery swept everyone forward, Carrie fell into step beside Olivia for just a moment, and she said very low, Olivia, who is he to you? Olivia kept walking. She did not look at Carrie. She did not slow down. He's a patient, she said. Carrie watched her go through the double doors. And she thought about 7 Echo, and the way Ryan Hale had looked at Olivia Chen, and the way Olivia had looked back, and she thought, no, that is not the whole truth. That is not even close to the whole truth. But the doors swung shut, and whatever was on the other side of them was already beyond her reach. In the scrub room, Olivia stood at the sink and ran the brush over her hands in long, methodical strokes, and she did not look at herself in the mirror above the sink because she knew what she would see there. She would see the face of a woman who had made a decision 3 years ago and had been living quietly inside the consequences of that decision ever since. And tonight those consequences had arrived in the form of a wounded man on a stretcher who knew her real name. She thought about the name Colonel Stiles. She had not thought about that name in a long time, or told herself she had not, which was not the same thing. She thought about 7 Echo. She thought about what that phrase meant and what it had cost, and who had died so that it could be buried. She turned off the water. She dried her hands. Dr. Huang appeared in the doorway of the scrub room. He was already gloved. He looked at her with an expression that was measured and careful. Before we go in, he said, is there anything I need to know? Olivia looked at him. She thought about all the things that were true. She thought about what he could use and what would only confuse him and what would get them both into a situation that neither of them was prepared for tonight. He has scar tissue on his left posterior flank, she said. Old injury, healed improperly. It's going to affect where you can safely place a retractor. Go 2 centimeters higher than you normally would. Huang looked at her. You've seen this before, he said. I've seen the imaging, she said. He held her gaze for one more moment. He was not a foolish man. He knew that was not a complete answer. He also knew that they were running out of time, and that an incomplete answer with a good piece of information inside it was better than nothing. 2 centimeters higher, he repeated. Yes, she said. They went in. The OR was cold and bright and smelled of antiseptic, and the specific clean metallic smell that never quite went away from rooms where people's bodies were opened and repaired. The team was ready. Ryan Hale was under. His chest rose and fell with the slow, mechanical rhythm of the ventilator, and the monitors tracked his heart in its stubborn, ongoing work of staying alive. Olivia took a position at the edge of the table, across from the scrub nurse, beside one of the residents. She was there to observe. Those were the terms. She was there to observe and to assist if asked, and to stay in her lane, which was the lane of a floor nurse who had no business being in an OR at all. And everyone in the room was aware of this, and had made the collective silent agreement to not look at it too directly for the time being, because there was a more important thing happening. The first incision was clean. Huang worked quickly and methodically, and for the first 6 minutes, everything went as expected. He addressed the primary wound with the calm efficiency of a man who had done this many times and was doing it well. The resident across from Olivia was watching with focus and making notes. The scrub nurse handed instruments without being asked. The anesthesiologist at the head of the table tracked numbers and said nothing. Then Huang reached the area around the secondary bleed and slowed down. Olivia saw it before he did. The scar tissue, exactly where she had said it would be, exactly the shape and density she had described. Old damage, healed hard, pulling things slightly out of the positions they would normally be in. Huang paused. He looked at it, and then he looked at Olivia across the table. 2 centimeters, he said. Yes, she said. He adjusted, and the adjustment was the difference between where the retractor would have gone and where it needed to go. And the difference mattered, and Huang knew it mattered, and his eyes above the mass said that he understood something tonight about Olivia Chen that had nothing to do with what was in her personnel file. The bleed was controlled. The repair was made. Ryan Hale's vitals, which had been declining with the patient persistence of something that had already made up its mind, began to stabilize. The numbers climbed. The anesthesiologist said, for the first time in 40 minutes, "Looking better." Olivia stood at the edge of the table and watched, and her hands were still, and her breathing was even. And if you had been watching her and not the patient, you would have thought she was perfectly calm. You would have thought she was simply a nurse who had been asked to observe a surgery and was doing her job with the professionalism you would expect from someone at Mercy General. You would have been almost entirely wrong. She was thinking about the word almost, how close he had come, how close they had both come, in other rooms, in other countries, under other circumstances that she was not supposed to think about anymore. She was thinking about 7 Echo and what it had meant to say those words out loud, in a trauma bay in a civilian hospital, and what it meant that Ryan Hale had said them to her. Not as a code, not as a signal, but as a recognition, as evidence, as proof that she was who he knew she was, and that who she was had not, in fact, Jigay buried. She thought about Colonel Stiles, and for the first time in 14 months, she felt the particular cold feeling of being found. Outside the OR, in the waiting area down the hall, a man in civilian clothes with a military bearing sat in a plastic chair and looked at his phone and did not read anything on it. He had been there for 45 minutes. He had not spoken to anyone. He was waiting for something specific, with the patience of someone who had been trained to wait. His name was not on any sign-in sheet. Nobody had asked him to show ID. He was very good at being in places without being noticed, which was a skill that certain people had invested a significant amount of money and time in teaching him. His phone buzzed. He looked at the message. He read it once. He stood up, and he walked very calmly toward the nurse's station to ask, in the polite and reasonable voice of a concerned family member, whether a patient named Ryan Hale had come through this hospital tonight, and whether the surgical team had included anyone whose name might be Chen. The man at the nurse's station gave his name as David Mercer. He said it the way people say names that belong to them, easy and without hesitation, the kind of ease that takes practice to manufacture. He told the nurse at the desk that he was looking for a friend, a military man, brought in by ambulance earlier that evening. He described Ryan Hale with just enough detail to be credible and not enough to seem rehearsed. He smiled when he spoke. He kept his hands visible. He was very good at this. The nurse, whose name was Patricia, and who had been on shift since 7 and was now running on vending machine coffee and willpower, looked at her computer and said, "I can't give out patient information. You'd need to be listed as family or emergency contact." "Of course," Mercer said. He nodded like a man who understood and respected the policy. "Is there a waiting area I can use? I just want to be nearby in case he needs anything." Patricia pointed him toward the chairs by the elevator bank. Mercer thanked her. He walked to the chairs and sat down, and did not look toward the OR corridor again, because he did not need to. He had already seen what he needed to see. He had seen the surgical team go in. He had counted the people. He had noted the small woman with dark hair who moved differently from the others, who carried herself with a specific, careful stillness of someone who had spent years learning not to be noticed and had gotten very good at it. He took out his phone and typed 4 words. "She is still here." He sent it. He waited. 12 seconds later, the response came back. "Keep her there." Mercer put the phone in his pocket. He leaned back in the plastic chair and closed his eyes. And to anyone watching, he looked like a tired man waiting for news about a friend. He was not tired. He was working. Inside the OR, at 1:14 in the morning, Ryan Hale's blood pressure crossed back above the threshold that meant he was going to survive the night. The number appeared on the monitor, and the anesthesiologist said, "There he is," in the quiet, satisfied tone of someone watching something come back from the edge. And Huang exhaled through his nose and kept his hands moving with the steady precision that had taken 20 years to build. Olivia stood at the edge of the table and felt the shift in the room and said nothing. She had been standing in approximately the same position for the better part of an hour. She had spoken twice during the procedure. Both times what she said had mattered. Both times Huang had looked at her afterward with the expression of a man recalculating something. The resident across the table, whose name was Desmond, had stopped trying to pretend he wasn't watching her. He was watching her. He had been watching her since the moment she identified the secondary bleed in the trauma bay, and he had been assembling a picture in his head that he couldn't quite complete because crucial pieces of it kept not making sense. He was 29 years old, and he was smart, and he knew the difference between a nurse who was good at her job and a person who was doing a job that was significantly below what they were trained for. He had been in this OR for 2 years. He had worked with a lot of nurses. None of them moved the way Olivia moved. None of them looked at a surgical field the way she looked at it. With the particular focused ownership of someone who had stood on the other side of this table before. He said nothing. He kept his eyes on the field and he filed it away. The closure took 40 minutes. When it was done, Huang stripped off his gloves and dropped them in the bin and turned to Olivia and said, "Walk with me." It was not a question. They went to the scrub room. Huang stood at the sink, and she stood near the door, and he ran the water over his hands even though they were already clean, the way surgeons sometimes do when they need a moment to think, and the hands are the only part of them that knows what to do with themselves. "I've been doing this for 22 years, he said. "I have worked with a lot of people, nurses, residents, attendings, fellows. I know what someone looks like when they're observing a surgery." He turned off the water. He turned to look at her. "And I know what someone looks like when they've done 100 of them." Olivia looked back at him and said nothing. "The scar tissue," he said, "the retractor placement, the way you tracked his pressure curve in the trauma bay and made a differential diagnosis that my residents didn't make." He paused. "Who are you?" "I'm a nurse," she said. "I've been on staff here for 14 months. You can check my credentials." "I don't doubt your credentials," he said. "I doubt they tell the whole story." The door to the scrub room opened. It was Dr. Webb, who had changed out of his trauma bay gloves and now wore the expression of a man who had been waiting patiently for this conversation and was prepared to wait longer if necessary. He looked at Olivia. He looked at Huang. He read the room in about half a second. "He's being moved to ICU," Webb said. "He's stable." He kept his eyes on Olivia. He's been asking for you since they started waking him up. Olivia did not move. That's not unusual after trauma surgery. Patients fixate on the last face they saw before going under. He's not fixating, Webb said. He's asking. By name. Your name. And then he's asking for something called 7 echo. And when we tell him we don't know what that is, he gets agitated and his pressure starts to climb. He stepped into the room and let the door close behind him. So I need you to tell me what 7 echo is. Silence. Kwong looked at Webb. Webb looked at Olivia. Olivia looked at the floor for one moment, just one, and then she looked up and her face was the same as it always was, steady and unreachable, and she said, "It's a designation, military. It refers to a specific field surgical unit that was deployed to a classified operation 3 years ago." Webb said, "Were you part of it?" A long pause. "Yes," the word landed in the room and changed the temperature. Webb sat down on the edge of the counter. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Olivia, you're listed on our staff as a registered nurse with 8 years of civilian hospital experience and a background in trauma care. Your references checked out. Your licensing is current. Everything on paper says exactly what it should say." "Yes," she said again. But, she agreed. "You're a surgeon," Kwong said. "Not a question, a statement. The flat, certain kind that a person makes when they have finished considering alternatives and arrived at the only explanation that fits." Olivia looked at him. "I was," she said. The silence that followed had the weight of everything that small word was carrying. Huang nodded slowly. He picked up a towel and dried his hands that were already dry. "And the reason you're not listed as one here," he said carefully, "is not because you lost your license or failed your boards." "No," she said. "It's because someone doesn't want people to know you exist." She said nothing, which was an answer. Webb stood up. "This is above my pay grade," he said, and he was not being dismissive. He was being factually accurate. "This is significantly above my pay grade, and I think we all know that." He looked at Olivia steadily. "What I know is that a patient in my ICU is awake and asking for you, and his blood pressure is doing things it shouldn't be doing, and you are the one person in this building who seems to know why. So I'm going to ask you to go sit with him, and I'm going to ask you to be careful. And whatever the rest of this is, we will figure out the rest of this in the morning." Olivia studied him for a moment. "You're not going to ask me more questions?" "I have about 40 more questions," Webb said, "but I've been in medicine long enough to know which problems to solve in what order. Right now, the problem is a man in ICU whose body is trying to stay calm and not managing it." He held the door open. "After that, we talk." She walked through the door. Desmond was in the hallway. He had been standing near the water fountain, which was close enough to the scrub room door that the position was not entirely accidental. He straightened when Olivia came out. She looked at him. He looked at her. He had the expression of a young man who had decided he was going to say something, even if he was not entirely sure he should. "The secondary bleed," he said. "You knew about it before imaging, before palpation. You knew about it when you were standing 10 feet away from him in the trauma bay." Olivia stopped walking. She turned to look at him. "How?" he said. She looked at him for a moment. He was young and earnest and genuinely asking, not as a challenge, just as someone who needed to understand how the world worked in order to get better at his job. She could see that. She thought about it. "His breathing pattern," she said finally, "the rate and the depth. Posterior internal bleed creates a specific kind of compensatory breathing that's different from surface wound shock. It's subtle. You have to have seen it before to recognize it." She paused. "You've seen a lot of trauma, Desmond. Next time you have a patient presenting with a significant surface wound and vitals that are declining faster than the surface wound accounts for, watch the breathing. Count the rate. Note the depth. The body tells you what's happening even when the imaging doesn't show it yet." Desmond stared at her. "Where did you learn that?" "Somewhere with worse equipment than this hospital," she said, and walked away. She pushed through the double doors to the ICU corridor, and the night closed around her. Quieter out here, the particular hushed frequency of a hospital in the hours between midnight and 4, when the urgent has become the managed, and the only sound is the steady mechanical conversation between machines and the bodies they are monitoring. Ryan Hale was in Bay 3. She could see him through the glass before she went in. He was awake. He was lying very still in the way that a person lies still when moving hurts, and they have made a decision not to move. Not because they can't bear the pain, but because they are managing it, measuring it, treating it like information rather than experience. His eyes were on the ceiling. His hands were flat on the blanket. He had the look of a man having a conversation with himself that had been going on for some time. She pushed open the door. He turned his head. His gray eyes found her, and the particular quality of the stillness he was in shifted, became something slightly different, less alone. "You're alive," he said. His voice was rough from the tube and the anesthesia and the general indignity of what his body had been through, but the words were clear. "You're alive," she said back, which is the more recent development and the one that required more work. Something moved in his face that was almost a smile and stopped just short of it. "You never changed," he said. "You always said the least possible thing." "It's efficient," she said. She pulled a chair to the side of the bed and sat in it and looked at the monitor and the numbers that were telling a story about a body that had been through a significant amount and was now, carefully, rebuilding. "How's your pain?" "Managed," he paused. "They told me you caught the second bleed." "Huang caught it. I told him where to look." "That's the same thing and you know it." He was quiet for a moment. His jaw worked. "I thought you were dead," he said, and the words came out different from the others, slower, carrying something underneath them that had nowhere else to go. "I was told you were dead. I was shown documentation. He stopped. "I believed it." "You were supposed to," she said. "Who?" he said. "Who made the call?" She looked at the monitor. She looked at his pressure. She looked at the number that told her whether or not this conversation was something his body could afford right now. The number was acceptable, barely. "Ryan," she said, "not tonight." "Styles," he said, just the name, flat and certain, and with a weight behind it that told her he had already arrived at the answer and was asking her to confirm it. She said nothing. "It was Styles," he said. "He pulled you out of 7 Echo and he buried you." "Why? What did you know?" "Not tonight," she said again. "I almost died," he said. "Tonight, and 3 years ago, apparently, you almost died. And the thing connecting both of those events is the same man. And I am lying in a hospital bed with a hole in my side, and I think I have earned—" "You've earned rest," she said. "That's what you've earned. Your pressure is still unstable, and your body has been through surgery, and you need to let it do its work." She leaned forward slightly. "I will still be here when you wake up. I'm not running." He looked at her. "You were running when you came here." "Yes," she said, "I was." "And now?" She looked at her hands. They were folded in her lap, the hands of a woman who had done things with them that went beyond what her current name tag suggested. She thought about that. She thought about what it meant to be found, about whether found was the same as caught, and whether she was going to let it be. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. He accepted that. He closed his eyes. The monitor continued its steady report. His breathing deepened, evened out. She stayed in the chair, and she watched the numbers, and she did not move, and the night continued around her, indifferent and unhurried. She had been there for 20 minutes when the door opened. She did not look up immediately. She thought it was a nurse doing a check. She thought it was Webb. She thought it was someone with a legitimate reason to be in the ICU at 2 in the morning. Then she felt it, the specific quality of attention in the room, the way the air changed when someone entered a space with a purpose that was not care. She looked up. The man standing inside the door was in civilian clothes, Mid-40s, medium everything, the kind of face that did not distinguish itself in memory. He was holding a folder, which was the right prop for a hospital corridor, plausible and disarming. But his eyes were doing something different from what the rest of him was pretending to do. His eyes were doing an assessment, fast and practiced, corners to center, door to bed to her. "Miss Chen," he said, quietly, with the particular courtesy of someone who does not need to be loud to be threatening. "My name is David Mercer. I work for a federal agency that I'm not going to name in this room. I've been asked to speak with you." Olivia did not stand up. She did not change her expression. She looked at him with the same steadiness she used for everything and said, "Visiting hours in the ICU ended at 9. "I'm not visiting," he said. "No," she agreed, "you're not." She looked at Ryan, who was asleep, whose monitors were steady, whose body was doing the slow, important work of putting itself back together. Then she looked at Mercer. "Step outside," she said. They stood in the corridor, the ICU glass behind them, the nurse's station 40 feet away with Patricia or someone like her behind the desk, present but not paying attention, the way hospital staff are present at 2 in the morning. Mercer held out the folder. She did not take it. "There are people who are relieved you're alive," he said, "and people who are not. The people who are not have been aware of your location for approximately 6 hours, which means you have approximately 6 hours less time than you might think." "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because the people who are relieved have sent me to tell you." She studied him. "Who sent you?" "Someone who knew you before your name was Chen." He paused. "Someone who was at 7 Echo." The words hit her differently than when Ryan had said them. Ryan had said them as recognition. Mercer said them as proof, as a key fitting a lock. She held herself still and did not let anything move on her face, and thought very rapidly about 3 or 4 different things at once, which was a skill she had developed in environments where rapid thinking was the difference between alive and not. "What do you want?" she said. "Styles is not finished," Mercer said. "Hale surviving tonight is a complication for him. You being alive and functional and in possession of what you know is a larger complication. He is going to move to resolve both of those things, and he has the resources to do it and the history of doing it." He looked at her steadily. "The people I represent want to move first, but they need what you have, what you know, what you took from 7 Echo before they burned it." Olivia was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the hospital breathed its nighttime breath, the distant sound of a cart, the muffled beep from somewhere down the corridor, the faint voice of someone at a desk. "If I had taken anything from 7 Echo," she said carefully, "what makes the people you represent different from Styles?" "They haven't tried to kill you," he said. "Not yet," she said. Mercer almost smiled. It was the almost of someone who respected the response, even though it complicated their job. "Fair," he said. "I can't give you certainty. I can give you time, but not much of it, and less of it the longer we stand here." Olivia looked through the ICU glass at Ryan, at the steady line of his heart on the monitor, at the particular vulnerability of a large, strong, capable man made horizontal by a piece of metal and gravity and bad luck. She thought about what it had cost her to walk into that trauma bay and do what she had done. She thought about whether it would have been possible to do anything else. She already knew the answer to that. "I need to make a phone call," she said. "To who?" "To no one you represent," she said. "If you're actually offering me time, give me 30 minutes and stay out of my way." She looked at him directly. "And tell whoever sent you that I decide what I share and when and with whom. That's not a negotiation. That's a condition." Mercer held her gaze. He nodded once. She found the phone that was not her work phone, the one with the number that no one at Mercy General knew about, the one she kept charged and active, not because she expected to need it, but because she was the kind of person who did not fully believe in safety. She typed a number from memory. It rang twice. A voice answered. No greeting, just a voice. She had heard it before, years ago, in better circumstances. She said, "He's alive. Stiles knows where I am. I need 24 hours." There was a pause on the other end. Then the voice said, "You'll have 12. She closed the phone. She sat back down in the chair beside Ryan's bed. She looked at the monitor. She looked at his face. She put her hands in her lap and she breathed, in and out, the long, deliberate breath of someone locating themselves inside a situation that has just become significantly more complicated and deciding what kind of person they are going to be inside it. Outside in the corridor, Mercer was still standing where she had left him. He was looking at his own phone. He was reading something that had just arrived. His face did not change, but his hand tightened on the phone, the one small involuntary tell of a man whose careful plans had just intersected with something he had not planned for. The message on his screen said 3 words, "Stiles is moving." And from somewhere in the building, far away, near the service entrance on the east side that the overnight security guard checked every 40 minutes on a schedule that had not been changed in 2 years, a door opened quietly in the dark. The door on the east side did not make noise when it opened. That was intentional. The hinges had been treated sometime in the last 24 hours, which told Olivia, when she found out about it 4 minutes later, that this had not been improvised. This had been planned, which meant Stiles had known where she was before tonight, or had moved faster than Mercer had suggested, or both. And none of those possibilities were ones she had time to be frightened by. She found out because of Patricia. Patricia, who had been at the nurse's station since 7 and was running on nothing but stubbornness and bad coffee, noticed the door because she noticed everything on this floor by a kind of exhausted osmosis, the way long-shift nurses develop a peripheral awareness that is almost animal in its sensitivity. She noticed the door because it opened onto a corridor that should have been empty, and the corridor was not empty anymore. She picked up the phone and called security. Then she walked to ICU Bay 3 and knocked twice and opened the door and said, in a voice that was controlled but carried something underneath the control, "Olivia, there's someone in the east corridor who doesn't belong here. Security is on their way, but I thought you should know." Olivia was already standing. She did not know why Patricia thought she should know. She suspected Patricia had been paying more attention tonight than anyone had given her credit for. She filed that away and looked at Ryan, who had opened his eyes at the sound of the knock, whose gray gaze had sharpened immediately from sleep to alert in the way of someone whose body did that automatically, whose nervous system had been trained to come back fast. "What is it?" he said, not a question. "Stay in this bed," she said. "Don't let anyone except Huang or Webb touch your IV lines. If someone comes in here and says they're from a federal agency, press that call button and do not stop pressing it." He reached out and grabbed her wrist. Again, the same grip as before, in the trauma bay, tight and deliberate in asking for 1 second of stillness. "Olivia, talk to me." "Stiles sent someone into the building," she said, flat and fast because there was no time for anything else. "Mercer is in the corridor, but I don't know whose side he's actually on, and I don't have time to figure it out right now. You're safe as long as you stay visible and loud. Can you do that?" He looked at her. The muscles in his jaw worked. He wanted to get out of the bed. She could see it in every line of him, the instinct to stand up and put himself between her and whatever was coming. The trained reflex of a man who had spent his career doing exactly that. It was fighting directly against the reality of the drainage tube in his side, and the IV in his arm, and the 22 stitches holding his abdomen together. "I hate this," he said. "I know," she said. She pulled her wrist free, not unkindly. "Press the button if anything happens." She was out the door before he finished the sentence. Mercer was still in the corridor, but he had moved. He was no longer standing still. He was at the far end of the ICU hall, near the junction that led to the east wing, and his posture had changed entirely. Gone was the relaxed civilian looseness. He was standing the way people stand when they are paying complete attention to something that has not yet come into view. Olivia came up beside him. "How many?" she said. He glanced at her. Something in his expression shifted, the thin, professional courtesy dropping away, replaced by something more direct. "One that I can confirm, possibly two." He paused. "They're not here for Hale." "I know," she said. "They're not here to talk to you either." "I know that too." She looked down the corridor. "What do you actually want from me, Mercer? Not what your people want. What do you want from me right now, in the next 5 minutes? He was quiet for exactly the length of time it takes a man Jige decide to stop performing and start being straight. "I want to get you out of this building without either of us getting shot," he said. "Everything else is secondary." "There are 43 patients on this floor," she said. "Some of them are in rooms that share walls with that corridor, so nobody is getting shot. That's a condition of any conversation we're having." Mercer looked at her. "You understand that you don't set conditions for what Stiles' people do?" "No," she said, "but I set conditions for what I do, and what I do right now determines whether you get what you came here for." She turned to look at him fully. "So, are you actually here to help me, or are you here to extract me? Because those are not the same thing, and I need to know which one I'm dealing with." He held her gaze. 3 seconds. 4. "Both," he said, "in that order." She nodded. She believed him. Not because she trusted him, but because the answer had the particular flavor of honesty that comes from someone who is tired of the version of the conversation that requires them to lie. She could work with that. "There's a service stairwell at the north end of this floor," she said. "It connects to the basement, and the basement connects to the parking structure. If your people are in the east corridor, they came in from the outside east entrance, which means they don't know the internal layout well enough to have covered the north exit." "Unless they do," Mercer said. "Unless they do," she agreed, "which is why I'm not going through it. I'm staying on this floor." She looked at him. "You're going through it, right now, and you're going to tell me in the next 30 seconds whether the person who sent you has enough reach to make a phone call that gets federal jurisdiction over this floor before Stiles' people decide they don't care about keeping it quiet." Mercer stared at her. "You want me to call in a federal hold on a hospital floor? I want someone to make it very clear to whoever is in that east corridor that doing anything inside this building tonight becomes a federal problem," she said. "That's not a complicated ask. That's a phone call. Can your people make it?" He pulled out his phone. He looked at it. He looked at her. "It's going to raise questions about why this floor needs a federal hold at 2:30 in the morning." "Good," she said. "Let it raise questions. Questions are loud. Loud is safe." She looked down the corridor again. "Make the call, Mercer." He made the call. She did not listen to what he said. She walked back toward the ICU bay, not running, not hurrying in any visible way, because visible hurry in a hospital corridor at 2:30 in the morning was its own kind of alarm. She walked at the pace of a nurse doing her rounds, and she thought very carefully about the next 12 hours and what they required of her and whether she was ready to give it. She was not ready. She was going to do it anyway. Patricia was at the nurse's station when Olivia came back past it. She was on the phone, speaking quietly, her hand curved around the receiver in a way that blocked the sound. She looked up when Olivia passed and held up 2 fingers. 2. Then she pointed toward the east corridor and held up 2 fingers again. 2 people. Patricia had seen 2 people. Olivia stopped. She looked at Patricia with a new kind of attention. Patricia was 61 years old and had been a nurse for 34 years and had the serene, immovable quality of someone who had seen everything this building could produce and had not been broken by any of it. And she was sitting at her station in the middle of the night tracking the movements of unauthorized people in her corridor with the focused calm of someone who had decided that this was her floor and whatever was happening on it was her business. "Patricia," Olivia said quietly. "Thank you." Patricia put the phone down. She looked at Olivia the way a woman looks at another woman when she has decided to say the thing that needs to be said, regardless of whether it is her place to say it. "I don't know what you're in the middle of," she said, "and I don't need to know. But I've been watching you work in this hospital for 14 months, and I watched you tonight in that trauma bay, and I know what I'm looking at." She paused. "Whatever you need, you've got it." Olivia looked at her. She did not have a ready answer for that. She was not accustomed to being offered things without conditions. She said, "Keep Bay 3 visible. Don't let anyone near him who isn't on the regular ICU staff." "Already done," Patricia said. Olivia turned away before the thing that was pressing against the back of her expression could get through it. At 2:41 in the morning, the East Corridor went quiet. Mercer's call had done something. She could not tell exactly what, but the specific quality of alertness that had been sitting in the building like pressure behind a locked door eased slightly. Not gone, eased. The way a storm eases when it has not decided to leave, but has paused to reorganize. She went back to Ryan's room. He was sitting up. He had gotten himself into a sitting position using only his right arm, protecting his left side with the careful deliberateness of a man who had an accurate internal map of his own damage. He looked at her when she came in, and the question was already on his face. "It's handled for now," she said. "For now," he repeated. "For now," she confirmed. She sat in the chair. She looked at the monitor. "Ryan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly, even if you think the answer is going to upset me." He was quiet, waiting. "How long has Stiles been watching you?" she said. A pause, long enough to tell her something. "I didn't know he was," he said. "Not until 3 months ago. I found a file. I wasn't supposed to find it. It was misfiled in a debrief packet from a different operation, and I almost missed it." His jaw tightened. "It had my name on it, and yours, and it had a date from 3 years ago, and a notation that said, 'Confirmed deceased.'" "But you didn't believe it," she said. "I didn't want to believe it," he said. "That's not the same thing. I convinced myself to believe it because the alternative was—" He stopped. The alternative meant that he had done it deliberately, and if he had done it deliberately, then everything else I'd accepted about 7 Echo, everything I'd been told about how the operation ended and why, was a lie. His eyes were steady on her. "I couldn't afford to believe that. Not while I was still inside the structure. Not while he still had command authority over my unit. And now," she said, "now I'm lying in a hospital bed with a bullet wound that has his fingerprints on it. And you're sitting 3 feet away from me, and I have been officially out of options for believing anything he told me." He exhaled. "So, tell me, what did you take from 7 Echo?" She looked at him. She had been deciding whether to have this conversation for the last 2 hours, or telling herself she had been deciding, when really she had known for some time that it was unavoidable. That Ryan Hale, awake and functional, and possessed of enough stubbornness to sit up in a hospital bed 8 hours after abdominal surgery, was going to ask this question and was going to keep asking it until she answered. "Documentation," she said. "Surgical records primarily. But embedded in the surgical records were authorization codes. Codes that linked specific operations to specific command decisions. If you pulled the right records and cross-referenced them with the operational timeline, you could prove that certain people were given orders that should not have existed, and that those orders came from above the level everyone was told they came from." She paused. "Stiles gave orders that got 6 people killed on 7 Echo, not because of mission failure, because they knew something he needed buried, and the documentation exists to prove it." Ryan was very still. "Where is it?" "Safe," she said, "in a place he hasn't found it in 3 years, which means either he doesn't know exactly what I took, or he doesn't know exactly where to look." She looked at her hands. "I should have moved on it sooner, I know that. I built a life, and I told myself that keeping quiet was keeping safe. And what I was actually doing was waiting. I don't know what I was waiting for." "You were waiting for a reason," he said. "That's not weakness. That's just human." She looked up at him. He was watching her with the gray eyes that had scared her 3 years ago. Not because they were hard, but because they were honest. And honest people in her world had always been the most dangerous kind. The ones that made you want to say things out loud that were safer kept inside. "There's a man in this building," she said. "Name is Mercer. He claims to represent people who want to use the documentation to move against Styles. I don't fully trust him. But he made a phone call tonight that kept things quiet when they could have gotten very loud," she said. "And he didn't have to do that. He could have let it get loud and used the chaos to get me out. That would have been cleaner for him." She paused. "He chose the option that was safer for the patients on this floor. That tells me something." Ryan looked at her for a long moment. "You're going to trust him." "I'm going to work with him," she said, cautiously, "for exactly as long as it takes to get what I need, and not a minute longer." "What do you need?" She looked at the monitor, at his pressure, which was stable, at his heart rate, which was elevated from the conversation, but within acceptable range, at the face of a man who had followed her into enough dangerous places in another life that the fact of him being in another dangerous place was almost comfortable in its familiarity. "I need 12 hours, she said, "and I need you to be alive at the end of them." "I can do that," he said. "You said that last time," she said. Something happened in his face then. Not quite a smile. Something older and more complicated than a smile. The acknowledgement of a shared history that included bad nights and near misses, and the specific dark humor of people who have worked in proximity to death long enough to have a relationship with it. "I'm still here," he said. "You're still here," she agreed. The monitor beeped once, sharp and clear, and both of them looked at it. The automatic alert response of people who had spent too much time listening to monitors to ever fully stop. It was nothing, a minor spike already resolving. His body, still talking, still reporting, still doing its work. She stood up. "Sleep," she said. "I mean it." "Olivia," his voice was quiet. "Be careful." She looked back at him from the doorway. She looked at him the way you look at someone when you are trying to memorize the fact of them. The fact that they are present and breathing and real. Because you know the next few hours are going to require you to go somewhere inside yourself where you cannot carry that comfort with you. "Get some sleep, Lieutenant," she said. She walked out. Mercer was waiting near the nurse's station. He had the look of a man who had made his phone call and was now standing on the other side of a decision he had made and could not unmake. He straightened when he saw her. "The hold is in place," he said. "My people flagged it as a federal witness protection matter. It won't hold indefinitely, but it buys time." "How much time?" 6 hours, maybe 8 if we're lucky." "We are not lucky," she said. "We never have been. 6 hours." She looked at him. "I want to meet whoever sent you. Not by phone, in person, before dawn." Mercer blinked. "That's not how this works." "I know," she said. "Change how it works." He stared at her. He looked like a man trying to identify which part of this conversation had gotten away from him and failing to locate the exact moment. "Why in person?" "Because Styles is moving, and I am not going to hand anything over to a voice on a phone," she said. "Because every person who has tried to use me as a resource without looking me in the eye has ended up using me as a liability instead. And because whoever sent you is either serious about what they're doing or they're not. And I can tell the difference in a room that I cannot tell over a phone. So," she looked at him steadily, "can you make that happen or can't you?" Mercer rubbed the back of his neck. He looked down. He looked up. He looked like a man doing rapid calculations about his career and coming out the other side having made a choice about something. "I can make it happen," he said. "It won't make them happy." "Good," she said. "I'm not here to make anyone happy. I'm here to finish something I should have finished 3 years ago." She looked at him. "Is there a car?" "In the parking structure." "Give me 20 minutes, she said. "I need to do something first." She went to find Webb. He was in his office, which was a small room near the trauma bay that smelled of coffee and paperwork, and the particular institutional exhaustion of a man who had chosen a career that did not allow for clean endings. He was sitting at his desk but not working. He was just sitting with his hands folded on the desk, looking at the wall in front of him. And when Olivia came in, he looked at her with the expression of a man who had been sitting there specifically waiting for her. "Tell me," he said. She sat down across from him. She thought about what she could give him that was true, and what she could give him that was safe, and whether those two things had any overlap tonight. She decided they had enough. "The patient in Bay 3 is a target," she said. "There are people in this building who were sent by someone who wants him dead. Those people are currently being held off by a federal flag on this floor, but the flag has a time limit. Before that time limit expires, I need Ryan Hale transferred." Webb looked at her. "Transferred where?" "To a facility with a federal protective detail. My contact can arrange it, but it needs to happen within the next 5 hours, which means it needs paperwork, and the paperwork needs your signature." "My signature," he said slowly. "Yes. On a transfer for a patient who is 8 hours out of abdominal surgery." "He's stable," she said. "His numbers are good. Kwong will agree. The medical case for transfer is defensible." Webb leaned back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at her. He was quiet for so long that she started to count the seconds, which was something she did when she was managing impatience, and she got to 11 before he spoke. "I went into medicine because I believed in the idea that this building was a safe place," he said. "That whatever was happening outside, in here, people got taken care of. That was the contract." He paused. "And now I have a nurse in my office who is apparently something significantly more than a nurse, telling me that people came into my safe place tonight to hurt one of my patients, and that the way I protect him is to sign paperwork that moves him out of my care." He looked at her directly. "Am I understanding this correctly?" "Yes," she said. "All right," he said. He opened his desk drawer and took out a blank transfer form. "Tell me what I need to put on this," she told him. He wrote it. His handwriting was small and precise, the handwriting of a careful man. When he was done, he looked at it for a moment before handing it across. "Olivia," he said. She took the form. "Webb. When this is over," he said, "you come back here, and you sit in that chair, and you tell me the actual story." He held her gaze. "Not the safe version, the real one." She looked at him. She thought about what it meant to be seen by someone, really seen, not the name on the badge or the credentials on the file, but the actual person underneath the careful construction of a borrowed life. She thought about how long it had been since she had let anyone see that. "When this is over," she said. She walked out of his office with the transfer form in her hand and Mercer at the end of the corridor, in 12 hours to do something she had been avoiding for 3 years. And for the first time since the double doors had blown open and Ryan Hale had come through them on a stretcher, she felt the particular cold clarity that comes when a person stops running and turns around to face the thing that has been behind them. She was not afraid. She was something more complicated than afraid. She was ready. In the way you are ready for something that is going to cost you, when you have decided that the cost is worth paying, and you are not going to let yourself think too carefully about it, because thinking too carefully is how you stop. She pushed through the stairwell door, and 3 floors above her, in a hospital administration office that should have been empty, a phone rang once and was answered, and a voice said, "She's moving. Do we take her now?" And after a pause, another voice said, "No, let her lead us to it. Follow her, and don't lose her this time." The stairwell door closed behind her, and Olivia moved down the stairs without turning on the light, because she did not need the light, and because the light would have made her visible from the landing above, and because old habits are not habits at all, but something closer to instinct, the kind of knowing that lives in the body and not the mind, and does not require a decision to activate. Mercer was 2 steps behind her. She had not told him to follow. He had followed anyway, which told her something about his actual instructions versus the instructions he had shared with her. She filed it and kept moving. The parking structure was 4 degrees colder than the hospital. She felt it when the stairwell door opened into the concrete smell and the particular dead air silence of a structure with no weather and no wind and nothing moving in it except 2 people walking fast toward a dark sedan parked near the stairwell exit with its engine already running. The driver did not turn around when they got in. He pulled out immediately. Olivia noted the plates. Government issue but not standard. The kind of plates that suggested federal adjacency without confirming federal identity. She noted the route he took, south first and then east, not toward downtown, not toward any government building she knew of, toward the older part of the city where the buildings were mid-century and the businesses on the ground floors changed every few years, but the buildings themselves never did. "Where are we going?" she said. 12 minutes, Mercer said. "That's not an answer." "It's the one I have," he said. She looked out the window. She was tracking the route automatically, building a map in her head, noting turns and distances, and the position of the car relative to the hospital, calculating how quickly she could get back if she needed to. She did not think she would need to. She thought about the transfer form in her jacket pocket. She thought about Webb's face when he handed it across the desk, the specific weight of a man who was extending trust he had not been given a sufficient reason to extend, on the strength of 14 months of watching someone do their job with a quality that exceeded the explanation for it. She thought about Ryan. She always came back to Ryan. At 3:04 in the morning, the car stopped outside a building that had been a printing company in a previous life and was now on its upper floors something else entirely. Mercer got out first. She got out second. The driver stayed in the car. The lobby was empty except for a man at a desk who looked up when they came in and looked back down without speaking, which meant he had been told they were coming and had no interest in them beyond confirming that they had arrived. They took an elevator to the 4th floor. The elevator was slow and made a sound on the way up that suggested it had opinions about its workload. The room they walked into was large and functional and smelled of coffee and the kind of sustained human occupation that happens when people have been working through the night for several nights in a row. There were 2 people in it. One was at a computer with his back to the door. The other was standing by the window with a cup of coffee, looking out at the city in the particular contemplative posture of someone who has been thinking for a long time and has not yet finished. He turned when she came in. He was 60 or thereabouts, with a kind of face that had once been sharp and was now something better than sharp, lined and knowing and capable of patience. She had last seen that face 3 years ago in a field hospital in a country whose name she did not use in conversation anymore. And the last thing he had said to her before she disappeared was go and do not come back unless you have no other choice. "Daniel," she said. "Olivia," said Rear Admiral Daniel Crossfield, retired, and the word retired did the particular work it always did for men like him, which was to describe a formal status while leaving everything else entirely in place. Mercer stepped back toward the door. He understood correctly that he had completed his part of this and that what came next was not his conversation. Crossfield set his coffee down. He looked at her with the measuring directness of someone who had been building toward this moment and was now taking a moment to confirm that the building was justified. "You look the same," he said. "You look older," she said. Something moved in his face that was close to a smile. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He sat across from her. The man at the computer continued working and did not turn around, and she understood that he was present not as a witness, but as a safeguard. And she understood that Crossfield had organized this meeting with the same careful structure he had always organized everything, which was to say with a thoroughness that accounted for what happened if things went wrong. "You know what I want to ask you first," he said. "You want to ask me why I waited," she said. 3 years, he said. "You had the documentation. You knew what it could do. You knew what Stiles had done, and you knew what he would keep doing if he was not stopped. He was not accusing her. His voice was level and direct. Why did you wait? She looked at her hands. She thought about the honest answer, which was not the same as the answer she had given herself for 3 years, which was that she was protecting the documentation, protecting herself, building a life that was safe enough to think from. The honest answer was simpler and harder, and she had been avoiding it with the particular determination of someone who knows they are avoiding something. Because stopping him meant coming back, she said, and coming back meant being who I was before, and I had spent 3 years becoming someone who was not at war. She paused. I was not ready to give that up. Crossfield was quiet for a moment. And now? Now he sent people into a hospital, she said, into a building full of patients who have nothing to do with any of this. He was willing to do whatever was necessary inside those walls, and whatever was necessary included people who had no part in it. Her voice stayed level, but something behind it had an edge. I can live with a lot of things. I lived with hiding. I lived with being dead on paper. I lived with leaving people behind who deserved better. She looked at him directly. I cannot live with being the reason someone gets hurt in a place that is supposed to be safe. I will not be that. Crossfield nodded slowly. The documentation, he said. Where is it? Before I answer that, she said, I need to know what you intend to do with it. Not the official answer, the real one. He looked at her. He had always respected that about her, the refusal to accept the surface version of a thing. It had made her a remarkable surgeon and a difficult subordinate, and the most reliable person he had ever sent into an impossible situation. There is a Senate subcommittee, he said, that has been building a case against Stiles's command decisions for 14 months. They have circumstantial evidence. They have testimony from 3 witnesses, 2 of whom have since recanted under pressure. What they do not have is documentary proof that ties specific operational authorizations to specific command decisions at his level. He paused. What you have does that. And if I give it to you, she said, and it goes to the subcommittee, and Stiles has enough reach inside the committee to bury it again? He doesn't, Crossfield said. Not this time. The chair of that subcommittee is a woman who lost her nephew on 7 Echo. She has been waiting for this for 3 years, and she has insulated her investigation against exactly the kind of interference Stiles specializes in. He held Olivia's gaze. She knows about you. She has known about you for 6 months. She is the reason Mercer found you before Stiles's people did. Olivia processed that. The particular sensation of learning that other people have been working on your problem from directions you were unaware of was not entirely comfortable. It carried with it the small vertigo of realizing that your solitude was partially an illusion, that the story you had been in had more actors in it than the ones you could see. She breathed through it. How close is Stiles to finding the documentation? She said. Very, Crossfield said. He's known for approximately 2 weeks that you're alive. He's been working backward from your current identity, cross-referencing employment records and financial trails. He found the hospital. Tonight was him confirming that you were there and deciding that the risk of moving was lower than the risk of waiting. He used Ryan, she said. The words came out flat, but they were not flat underneath. The bullet wound. It wasn't random. We don't know that for certain, Crossfield said carefully. I know it, she said. Ryan is the one person who would have made me surface. Stiles knew that. He used it. She looked at Crossfield steadily. Which means he knows more about me than I thought. Which means we have less time than either of us wants to admit. Crossfield did not argue with that. He looked at her and she could see him recalculating, doing the same rapid mathematics she had done, and arriving at the same conclusion. How long to retrieve the documentation, he said. 4 hours, she said. Maybe 3.5. We have 6 before the federal hold on the hospital expires. I know, she stood. I need a phone, not mine. And I need to know that Ryan Hale's transfer is being processed right now, Not when I get back. Not when this is done. Now. Crossfield looked at Mercer, who was still near the door. Mercer nodded once and stepped into the hallway with his phone. Crossfield looked back at Olivia. "Sit down for one more minute," he said. Not a command, a request. She sat. "I should have moved faster 3 years ago," he said. "When they told me you were dead, I had doubts. Not certainties, but doubts. I chose to believe the documentation over the doubts, and the documentation was his. He forged it, or had it forged, and I accepted it because the alternative was a problem I was not ready to fight." He looked at her with the specific discomfort of a man who has been carrying something for a long time and has decided to put it down in front of someone who deserves to see it. "I am sorry for that." Olivia looked at him. She thought about 3 years in a quiet life that was not her life, built on someone else's decision to make her disappear. She thought about what she had lost and what she had built instead, and whether the built thing had any value or whether it had just been waiting. She thought about what it meant that he was saying this now, in this room, at 3 in the morning, with everything already in motion. "Don't be sorry," she said. "Be useful." He almost smiled. "That I can do," he said. She stood up for the second time, and this time she stayed standing. "I'll be back before sunrise," she said. "Have someone ready to move the documentation the moment I hand it over. I don't want it in my hands any longer than it has to be." She was at the door when his voice stopped her. "Olivia," she turned. He was looking at her with something in his face that was beyond the operational, beyond the careful professional structure of what they were doing. "Ryan Hale submitted a formal inquiry 14 months ago. About you. About 7 Echo. He was told it was classified and to stand down." He paused. "He did not stand down. He's been asking questions for over a year. That is why he became a problem for Stiles. The bullet wound was not random, and it was not about you." He held her gaze. "It was about him, about what he had already found." The room was very quiet. She stood in the doorway and absorbed this, and felt it move through her with the force of something that changes the geometry of everything around it. Ryan had not surfaced because of her. He had surfaced because he had been digging, on his own, with no knowledge that she was alive, pulling at the threads of 7 Echo because he could not leave them alone. And Stiles had come for him because of that, not because of her. And she had come for him tonight because she had walked into a trauma bay and recognized a man who was bleeding to death on a stretcher and had done the only thing she knew how to do. And here they were. "I'll be back before sunrise," she said again, and she walked out. The car that took her to the storage facility was different from the one that had brought her to Crossfield. The driver was a woman, early 30s, who drove with the focused economy of someone who had been doing this long enough to have stopped finding it interesting. She did not attempt conversation. Olivia did not encourage it. The facility was in an industrial district that was quiet at this hour. She had rented the unit under a name that did not connect to any of her other names, paid in cash for 3 years running, and visited it 4 times since she had first stored the documentation there, each time approaching from a different direction and leaving by a different route. She had told herself this was professional habit. She understood now that it had also been a form of tending. The way you tend something you have not decided what to do with, but cannot bring yourself to abandon. She entered the facility alone. The driver stayed with the car. She was inside for 11 minutes. When she came out, she was carrying a sealed, waterproof case, approximately the size of a hardcover book. She held it with both hands and did not look at it, and got back in the car without speaking. On the drive back, her phone buzzed. The phone Mercer had given her, not her own. She looked at the screen. The message was from a number she did not recognize. It said, "Transfer completed. He's been moved. He's asking for you." She read it twice. She put the phone in her pocket. She looked out the window at the city moving past in the particular pale dark of 4 in the morning, that hour when the night has gone on long enough to start losing its certainty. She thought about Ryan asking for her. She thought about him asking for over a year, in a different sense, digging through classified files and formally submitting inquiries and not standing down when they told him to stand down, because that was who he was, because he had never once in the time she had known him been capable of leaving a thing unfinished when the unfinished thing mattered. She thought about the first time she had met him, which had been in a situation significantly less controlled than a trauma bay, in the back of a field vehicle with a man whose chest she was keeping closed with her hands, while someone drove very fast over roads that were not roads. Ryan had been the one holding the flashlight. He had held it steady for 47 minutes while she worked. She had not thought about him being afraid. She had thought about the light being steady. Afterward, when the man was stable and she was sitting against the wall of the vehicle, coming down from the concentrated focus of the last hour, Ryan had sat beside her and said nothing, which was exactly the right thing, and handed her a water bottle, which was also exactly the right thing, and that had been the beginning of something she had spent 3 years pretending had been nothing. It had not been nothing. She had always known that. The car stopped outside the building with the slow elevator. She carried the case upstairs. Crossfield was still there. The man at the computer was still there. Mercer was at the window now, his back to the room, talking quietly into his phone. She set the case on the table. Crossfield looked at it. He looked at her. He reached for it and she put her hand on top of it and he stopped. "I want to be in the room when it goes to the committee chair," she said. "I want to see it received. I am not going to stand in a hallway and wait to be told that everything is fine." Crossfield looked at her steadily. "That's going to complicate the process." "I know," she said. "I have been complicating processes my entire career. This one is not special." A pause. Then Crossfield said, "Agreed." She moved her hand. He took the case. Mercer turned from the window. His expression had changed in a way that pulled her attention immediately, the specific shift of a man who has received information that has reordered his priorities. "We have a problem," he said. Nobody in the room spoke. "Stiles is not at his registered address," Mercer said. "He's not at the Pentagon. His security detail checked in 40 minutes ago from a location 12 minutes from this building." He looked at Olivia. "He's not following you. He's not following the documentation. He's moving toward the facility where Hale was transferred." The words hit her like cold water. He knew about the transfer. "He must have had someone inside the hospital," Mercer said. "Someone who saw the paperwork or saw Hale being moved and made a call." She was already moving toward the door. "Which facility?" Mercer gave her the address. She repeated it in her head twice to make it permanent. She turned to Crossfield. "Get that case to your subcommittee chair right now, tonight. Do not wait for morning. And get federal protection to that facility in the next 20 minutes, or there won't be a witness left to testify to anything." Crossfield was already on his phone. She was already out the door. The driver outside was still in the car. Olivia got in and said the address, and the driver pulled out without a question and drove in a way that made clear she understood the urgency, because some things do not require explanation. At 4:31 in the morning, Olivia's phone buzzed again, the number she did not recognize. She answered it this time instead of reading the message. A voice she had not heard in 3 years. A voice she would have recognized in any context under any circumstances, said, "They moved me. I know. I got the address from the transfer paperwork before they took it." A pause. "Olivia, there are 2 men in civilian clothes in the lobby of this building who told the security desk they are federal marshals. They are not federal marshals." She knew his voice even weakened by surgery and pain. She knew the specific quality of calm he was using, the professional override, the decision to be precise when precision was what was needed. She pressed the phone to her ear and said, "I know, I'm coming. 9 minutes. Ryan, listen to me. Do not let them get you to a stairwell or a service exit. Stay in a room with staff. Stay visible. As long as there are witnesses around you, they cannot move." "Understood," he said. Then quieter, stripped of the operational tone, just the man underneath it. Be careful. 9 minutes, she said. She did not say, be careful, back to him, because she could not say it and mean it, and she had promised herself a long time ago that she would not say things she did not mean to people who deserve the truth. She put the phone in her pocket and looked at the road in front of them and thought about 9 minutes and what could happen in 9 minutes and what she needed to be when she got there. And she put everything else away. She put Ryan's voice away. She put Crossfield in the case in the subcommittee and 3 years of a borrowed life and the specific ache of being found by the people who should have found her and the people who should not have. She put all of it in the place where she put things that she would deal with when she could afford to deal with them. And she was, in that car, at 4:30 in the morning, nothing but the person she had always actually been, clear and focused, and entirely without fear, in the particular way of someone who has run out of things to lose, and discovered, on the other side of that, a strange and total freedom. The car accelerated, the city moved past, and somewhere in a medical facility, 12 minutes away, a man with 22 stitches in his abdomen and gray eyes that had been looking for her for over a year, was holding his ground in a hallway under fluorescent lights, doing the thing he had always done, which was to hold on and stay visible and trust that she was coming. She was coming. The car pulled up at 4:39 in the morning, and Olivia was out before it fully stopped, moving through the entrance of the facility with the particular forward momentum of someone who has already done the math and does not like the answer and is moving anyway. The lobby had 4 people in it, a nurse at the admissions desk, an orderly near the elevator, and 2 men in civilian clothes standing near the security station with the specific casual alertness of people pretending not to be alert. She clocked them in her first 2 seconds inside. They clocked her in theirs. She did not slow down. She walked directly to the admissions desk and said to the nurse, a young man with an exhausted face, "Ryan Hale. He was transferred here within the last hour. Which floor?" The nurse looked at his screen. "I need to see some ID. I'm the nurse who managed his post-surgical care at Mercy General. My name is Olivia Chen, and I am on his emergency contact list." "Which floor?" The nurse looked at his screen again. "3rd floor, room 318. But visiting hours don't start until..." She was already at the elevator. She felt the 2 men move when she moved. Not toward her, repositioning, the way people reposition when a variable enters a situation and they need to reassess. She pressed the elevator button and kept her back straight and her breathing even, and she counted. 1 man staying near the security station. 1 man moving toward the stairwell door. The elevator opened. She got in. She pressed 3. The doors closed. She had approximately 45 seconds. She got out on the 3rd floor and turned right and found 318 and pushed open the door, and Ryan was sitting up in bed with his arms crossed in the expression of a man who had been waiting and had things to say about the waiting. The monitor beside him was beeping steadily. An IV line ran into his right arm. He looked pale, and he looked like he was in pain that he was managing with the iron stubbornness that was, she had always thought, both his greatest asset and his most exhausting quality. He looked at her when she came in, and the particular set of his jaw loosened by approximately 2 degrees, which for Ryan Hale was the equivalent of someone else collapsing in relief. "You made it," he said. 8 minutes and 40 seconds, she said. "I said 9. She crossed to his bed. She looked at his monitor. She looked at the IV. She looked at him. "Are you in pain?" "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." "Yes," he said. "I'm in pain. I had surgery 8 hours ago. It would be strange if I wasn't in pain." He watched her check the IV line with the focused attention of a man who has learned that when Olivia Chen is checking something, there is a reason. "What are you looking for?" "Making sure the line is clean," she said. "The men downstairs, if they have someone in this facility, the line is the first thing they touch." He went very still. "Is it clean?" "Yes," she said. "It's fine." She stepped back. She looked at the door. We have a few minutes before they figure out which room you're in. After that, it depends on whether Crossfield's people get here first. Tell me about the documentation, he said. She looked at him. He looked back. He had always had that particular quality of asking directly for the thing he wanted to know, without approach, without the social softening that most people used. She had found it abrupt the first time she encountered it. She had come to understand it as a form of respect. He did not waste her time with the long way around because he did not believe her time deserved to be wasted. I had surgical records from 7 Echo, she said. Embedded in the records were authorization codes that linked specific operational orders to Styles directly. Orders that should not have come from his level. Orders that got people killed because they were designed to, not because of mission failure. She paused. 6 people died on that operation, Ryan. Not from enemy contact, from command decisions that were specifically structured to eliminate people who knew too much about what Styles had authorized in the 2 operations before 7 Echo. Ryan was quiet. His jaw worked. She watched him take that in and process it and arrive at the place he was going to arrive at, which she had known he would arrive at since the moment Crossfield told her he had been digging for over a year. The place where the thing you suspected becomes the thing you know, and you have to decide what to do with the weight of the knowing. The people who died, he said, on 7 Echo, Mattingly, Park, the others. Yes, she said, he ordered it. He authorized the parameters that made it inevitable, she said, which is how he always worked. Nothing direct. Everything structured so the outcome was his, and the decision trail pointed elsewhere. She looked at Ryan steadily. I watched him do it once before 7 Echo, and I collected what I could, and I stayed quiet, and I should not have stayed quiet. That is something I will carry. She paused, but I'm not carrying it after today. Something moved through his face, not absolution, because he was not the kind of man who offered absolution cheaply. Something more useful than that. The look of a person who has decided to move forward and wants the person beside them to move forward too. What happens now, he said. Crossfield takes the documentation to the subcommittee chair, she said. Before this morning, before Styles can position himself for whatever the next move is. She stopped. She heard something in the corridor, a footstep that was heavier than nursing staff, that had a different rhythm. They're on the floor, she said. Ryan uncrossed his arms. He moved as if he intended to get out of the bed. Don't, she said. Olivia, you have 22 stitches and a drainage tube, and if you tear that repair open, you will bleed out faster than anyone in this building can stop it, and I will not let that happen. She looked at him with the directness she used when she needed someone to actually hear her and not just listen. I need you in that bed. That is where you help me right now. Stay visible, stay loud, stay alive. Can you do that? A long beat. The footstep in the corridor, again, closer. Ryan looked at the door. He looked at her. He looked at the call button on the bed rail. Get behind me, he said. Ryan, I cannot get out of this bed, he said, so I am doing the one thing I can do, which is put myself between you and that door. Get behind me, Olivia, please. She had heard him say please exactly 3 times in the years she had known him. Each time had been the same, stripped of everything except the raw directness of a man who did not use the word lightly. She moved to the far side of the bed without arguing. The door opened. The man who came in was not one of the 2 from the lobby. He was older, 50s, with the build of someone who had been physically formidable once and had maintained enough of it to remain dangerous. He was wearing a jacket over a collared shirt, and he moved into the room with the practiced calm of authority, real or manufactured, and closed the door behind him. He looked at Ryan. He looked at Olivia behind Ryan, and he said, in a voice that was almost pleasant, Miss Chen, you've had a busy night. Colonel Styles, she said. The room changed. Not physically, nothing moved, But the specific gravity of the situation shifted the moment his name was in the air, because his name was no longer a referred-to thing, a background threat, a presence felt but not seen. It was him, in this room. At 4:44 in the morning, standing between them and the door, with the particular unhurried confidence of a man who had spent decades being the most powerful person in every room he entered, and had not yet encountered a room that corrected that assumption. Ryan's hand moved to the call button on the bedrail. "I wouldn't do that," Stiles said, conversational, reasonable. "The security guard on this floor is currently unavailable, and the staff at the nurses' station are occupied. You have a few minutes before that changes. I suggest we use them productively." "You came yourself," Olivia said. She kept her voice level. She needed information, and she needed time, and both of those things required him talking. "I didn't expect that. I did try to manage this through other people," Stiles said. "They proved inadequate. That is a pattern I'm tired of." He looked at her with the measuring attention of a man assessing an asset. "The documentation, where is it now?" "Gone," she said. His expression did not change. "Gone means either destroyed or transferred. If it were destroyed, you would not have left the storage facility with a case. So transferred." He tilted his head slightly. "To whom?" She said nothing. "I know about Crossfield," he said. "I have known about Crossfield's involvement for 6 weeks. Do you think I moved without accounting for him?" A pause. "The subcommittee chair he intends to deliver your documentation to had a family emergency approximately 1 hour ago. She is currently at a hospital in another state. She will not be available for the kind of urgent, middle-of-the-night meeting Crossfield is attempting to arrange." The words landed with the weight they were intended to carry. Olivia absorbed them and did not let her face change and thought very rapidly. "So," Stiles said, "whatever timeline you believed you were operating on has changed, which means the productive conversation is the one where you tell me where Crossfield has the documentation right now, and we discuss the terms of an arrangement that allows you to continue the quiet life you have clearly worked very hard to build." He looked at Ryan. "And allows Lieutenant Hale to continue his recovery without further complications." Ryan's voice was very quiet and very clear when he said, "You shot me." Stiles looked at him. "The operation that resulted in your injury was authorized through proper channels." "You shot me," Ryan said again. Not a question, not an accusation looking for confirmation, a statement. The flat, certain kind that comes from a man who has arrived at a truth and is placing it in the room like an object, solid and immovable. "Because I was asking questions you needed stopped. Because I was getting close to the same thing Olivia had, and you could not afford 2 people with that knowledge active at the same time. You were becoming a liability," Stiles said. The pleasantness in his voice had thinned, just slightly, just enough to show what was underneath it. People who ask questions in the wrong direction, in the wrong places, become liabilities. That is not personal. That is the arithmetic of classified operations and the security of ongoing missions. "Mattingly," Ryan said. "Park, Reyes, Garza, Tomas, Webb." He said the names one at a time, evenly, with the specific weight of a man who had memorized them and intended for them to be heard. "Those are not arithmetic, those are people." Something shifted in Stiles's face. Not guilt. Men like Stiles had managed guilt into something unrecognizable years ago. It was something colder than guilt. The look of a man who is recalculating how long he intends to let this conversation continue. Olivia saw it. She pressed the call button. Stiles moved toward her. Ryan grabbed his IV pole with his right hand and put it between them with a force that was not surgical patient force. That was something older and more fundamental than what the last 8 hours should have left him with. And the pole caught Stiles across the forearm as he reached forward, and the impact was enough, just enough, to check his forward motion by 2 seconds. 2 seconds was what she needed. She was not a fighter. She had never been a fighter in the sense of trained combat. That was not her background. That was not her skill. But she had spent years in environments where the difference between outcomes was decided by who moved first and who hesitated. And she did not hesitate, and she used the 2 seconds to get to the door and open it and say into the corridor, loudly, clearly, with the specific carrying authority of a nurse who has been in emergency medicine for years and knows how to make a voice fill a space. I need security in room 318 right now. I have an unauthorized person in this room and a post-surgical patient being threatened. The nurse's station was not empty. Patricia had told her once, in the conversation that Olivia now understood had not been accidental small talk, but something more deliberate, that good nurses on night shift never let a floor get fully quiet, that there was always someone awake, always someone paying attention, always someone who had made the decision that their floor was their responsibility. The nurse who came was not Patricia. She was younger, maybe 25, with the focused expression of someone who had heard that voice and understood what it meant. She was already on her radio when she reached the doorway. Stiles looked at the nurse. He looked at Olivia. He looked at Ryan, who was sitting up in bed with the IV pole still in his hand, and the particular expression of a man who would very much like to stand up and has made a decision not to for specific and reasoned medical reasons, and resents all of it. The arithmetic changed. Stiles was many things, but he was not a man who moved without calculating the exposure. A hospital room with a nurse on a radio and a post-surgical patient as a witness, and a woman who had just announced his presence loudly enough for 3 other rooms to hear, was no longer a manageable situation. It was a liability. He understood liabilities. He straightened his jacket. He looked at Olivia one last time with the specific look of a man who is leaving a room, but not a situation, making clear that the situation continues, that this is a pause and not an ending. You've complicated things, he said quietly. That's what I do, she said. He walked past her into the corridor. The young nurse stepped back. Stiles walked toward the elevator with the unhurried pace of a man who had somewhere to be and intended to get there. He did not run. He did not look back. The young nurse looked at Olivia. Should I call the police? Yes, Olivia said, and call the number I'm going to give you and ask for a man named Crossfield. Tell him Stiles was here. Tell him Olivia said the timeline has moved up. She looked at the nurse directly. Can you do that right now? Yes, the nurse said. She already had the radio in one hand. She was 25 years old, and she was not shaking, and she was going to be extraordinary at this job. Olivia thought that with a brief and genuine clarity before setting it aside. She went back into the room. Ryan had set the IV pole back in its place. He was sitting against the pillow with the controlled stillness of a man managing significant pain that a recent significant physical effort had significantly increased. And he was not going to say anything about that, and they both knew it. She crossed to him. She checked his IV line. She checked his drainage tube. She checked his stitches through the gown, pressing carefully, looking for the specific firmness that meant hold, and not the give that meant tear. Everything held. You could have made that worse, she said. I know, he said. You should not have used that arm. I know that too. Your pressure is going to spike from the exertion. Probably, he agreed. He looked at her while she worked, while she moved around him with the efficiency and the care that was as native to her as breathing. And his voice, when he spoke again, was quieter, the operational layer gone entirely. Is it over? She sat down. The chair she had occupied 3 hours ago at Mercy General, or one just like it, and the specific exhaustion of the night settling over her now that the forward motion had paused, and there was nothing immediately to move toward. Not yet, she said. Crossfield has the documentation. Stiles knows it, and he's going to move to counter it. But he's exposed now. He was in this room. There are witnesses. The documentation and the physical presence together change what the subcommittee can do and how fast they can do it. She looked at her hands. It's not over, but it's the beginning of over. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, What do you want to do when it's actually over? The question surprised her, not because it was unexpected from him, but because she had not asked it of herself, had not permitted herself to ask it, had been so focused on the motion required to get from this moment to the next, that the question of what came after had existed only as a theoretical reward for surviving. She looked at him and she thought about it for the first time, genuinely thought about it, let herself. I want to practice medicine, she said, under my actual name. I want to stand in a room and do the thing I was trained to do and not pretend to be smaller than I am. She paused. I want to not be dead on paper. That's achievable, he said. I know, she said. I know it is, She stopped. She looked at him. I want to not have spent 3 years hiding while he kept operating. I want that to not have happened. And it did happen, and I have to figure out how to put that down. Ryan looked at her steadily. He had the patience of someone who understood that there were things you could fix and things you had to carry, and that the carrying was its own kind of strength. You saved my life, he said. Tonight, in that trauma bay, you looked at me and you saw what everybody else missed, and you made a decision to stay in the room and do the work. He held her gaze. That happened too. Put that down next to the other thing and see which one weighs more. She looked at him. She thought about that. She thought about the specific calculus of a life, the things that diminish you and the things that build you back, and the way the two exist together, inseparable, not canceling each other out, but not leaving you unchanged either. You're very philosophical for someone who just used a compromised arm to hit a colonel with an IV pole, she said. Something moved in his face that was fully a smile this time. Not stopped short of, not almost, a real one. I have good material to work with, he said. At 5:17 in the morning, Mercer arrived on the 3rd floor with 2 people who were not introduced by name, but whose presence had the specific quality of federal jurisdiction, arriving late to a situation it was now prepared to manage. They secured the floor. They took statements. They made phone calls that resulted in other phone calls. The particular chain of escalation that happens when something classified becomes something public in the wrong sequence. At 5:51, Crossfield called. Olivia took the call in the corridor outside Ryan's room. He told her that the subcommittee chair's family emergency had been resolved, which was Crossfield's way of saying that whatever Stiles had arranged to keep her unavailable had been countered. The chair was on a call with Crossfield's people at that moment. The documentation was being reviewed. At 6:08, Stiles was detained at the airport. She found out because Mercer came and told her, standing in the doorway of Ryan's room, with the expression of a man delivering news he had not been sure he would be able to deliver. He said it plainly. Detained at the airport by federal agents. The case number already assigned. The process already begun. She nodded once and said, "Thank you." And Mercer looked at her with something that was not quite surprise, but was adjacent to it. The look of someone recalibrating who they thought they were dealing with, and finding the recalibration overdue. When he left, Ryan looked at her and said, "How do you feel?" She thought about it honestly. "Strange," she said. "I expected to feel something larger, relief or anger or something conclusive." She looked at the monitor, at his steady heart rate, at the numbers that told the story of a body doing its quiet work. "It just feels like the end of something very long." "The end of something very long is exactly what it is," he said. She stood up. She checked his line one more time, the IV, the drainage tube, the stitches, because checking these things was her nature, and because she was still a nurse in this room, and he was still her patient, and some structures persist even when everything around them has changed. Everything held. "Webb wants me back," she said. "He asked me to come back to Mercy General when this was over." Ryan looked at her. "Are you going to?" She thought about Mercy General, about the fluorescent lights and the double doors, and Patricia at the nurse's station, and Desmond in the OR watching her with the focused attention of someone trying to understand something important about his profession. She thought about 14 months of being exactly what she pretended to be, and how sometimes the thing you pretend to be and the thing you actually are have more overlap than you expected, and how that overlap turns out to be the place where something real can live. "Yes," she said, "but not as what I was." She looked at him. "I'm going to tell them who I am. I'm going to practice as what I was trained to be." She paused. "It's going to be complicated." "You're good at complicated," he said. "I'm tired of being good at complicated," she said. "I would like to be good at something straightforward for a while." "You saved my life," he said. "That was straightforward. You walked in and you saw what needed to be done, and you did it." She looked at him. She looked at the man in the bed, gray eyes and stubborn jaw and 22 stitches, and the specific quality of a person who had been looking for her for over a year and had not stopped and would not have stopped, who had nearly died because he refused to leave things unfinished when the unfinished things mattered, and who was looking at her now with the expression of someone who does not intend to stop looking. She picked up her jacket from the back of the chair. She looked at him one more time. "Get some sleep," she said. "You keep saying that," he said. "You keep not doing it," she said. "I'll sleep," he said, "when I know you're not walking out of a building into something I can't follow you into." She stood at the door. She looked at him with the full attention she usually distributed carefully, the particular directness of a woman who has spent years being strategic about what she let people see and has decided, in this room, in this specific early morning, that strategy is no longer the point. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "Not this time." He held her gaze. The monitor beside him continued its steady report, his heart doing its work, persistent and unbroken. "Good," he said. She walked out. She walked down the corridor and pressed the elevator button, and stood in the elevator and rode it down to the lobby, and walked out through the entrance into the early morning. And the city was the particular pale gray of 6 o'clock, when the dark has finished and the light has not yet committed, and the air was cold and real against her face. She stood on the sidewalk and she breathed, in and out. The long, deliberate breath of a woman who has been running for 3 years and has just, in this moment, on this sidewalk, in this gray early morning, stopped. She took out her phone, not the one Mercer had given her, her own. She found Webb's number. She pressed call. He answered on the second ring, which told her he had not slept. "It's Olivia," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm coming back," she said, "but I need you to know who you're getting." A pause. Then Webb said, "I watched you save a man's life last night by standing still and paying attention. I watched you go into an OR that was not your room and make a repair possible that would not have been possible without you. I watched you handle things that I do not have words for yet and come through all of it with the same face you use for everything." Another pause. "I know who I'm getting, Olivia. I've known for a while." She closed her eyes, just for a moment, just for the length of time it takes to let something in that you have been keeping at a distance. "My real name," she said, "is Dr. Olivia Chen. I was a trauma surgeon with the Navy for 11 years. I am going to need my credentials reinstated, and I am going to need a conversation with hospital administration, and it is going to be complicated and slow and bureaucratically unpleasant, and I am going to need your help navigating it." Silence on the other end, long enough for her to count to 7. Then Marcus Webb said, in the voice of a man who has just received the answer to a question he has been sitting with all night and finds the answer both exactly what he expected and better than he hoped. "Welcome back, Doctor." She opened her eyes. The city was getting lighter. The gray was warming toward something. A bus passed. Someone walked a dog on the other side of the street. The ordinary world, continuing in its ordinary way, entirely unaware of what had happened in the last 6 hours, and indifferent to it. And she found that she did not mind the indifference. She did not need the world to know. She did not need the world to bear witness. She just needed to be in it, under her own name, doing the work she was built to do, without apology and without hiding. She put her phone in her pocket. She straightened her jacket. And Dr. Olivia Chen, who had been dead on paper for 3 years and was now, as of this morning, irrevocably and completely alive, walked forward into the day that was already beginning without her and caught up to it and did not look back.